Remember this total hamfest of a show? The one with the Midnight Society of monotone child actors who would break out of their house to gather around a campfire and tell scary stories? It's funny how the internet people that grew up on this stuff ended up forming a Midnight Society of their own. It's the creepypasta threads, in which grown-ass adults gather around anonymous glowy forum posts to do pretty much the same thing. Somewhere in this primordial culture soup emerged the Slenderman, a kitschy recurring creature with a really clever design whose execution is often a bit sloppy. The Slenderman himself is that kind of pop culture monster who's not exactly scary to look at, but scary to think about. His design embodies that awfully effective horror juxtaposition that pitches safe, familiar sights against sinister, supernatural logic. It's effective horror because it uses symbols that we can all recognize and relate to. He's a mysterious, masked businessman in a fancy suit who follows you around when you don't want him to. So it's tapping into that primal dark fear that we all have of running into your asshole boss outside the office. Goddamn, can't wait to get home away from Mr. Peterson. Well, maybe his trick isn't that specific, but he's gotta be doing something right. Though I wasn't much of a fan of it, the freeware Slender game really took off last year, and I mean really took off. It was fairly minimalistic and kind of an experiment, but the experiment worked. So now we have a retail release that has actual production values, and this game might actually be the slickest piece of Slenderman media yet. It's pretty encouraging to see such a small experiment blow up like this, but it's still a problematic product. It gets all the little things right, but the big elephant of a game in the middle of the room overshadows all those subtleties. I mean, don't get me wrong, the game gives a hell of a first impression. The first 20 minutes look and play beautifully. It's a real treat for the eyes, though like a lot of 3D Unity games, general performance and responsiveness is kinda slow. But these maps are designed with an incredible amount of aesthetic skill. The sound design is top-notch too, and even its non-linear and thickly veiled story does a good job of contextualizing the gameplay. There's a compelling arc with characters and backstories now, and it's respectably subtle. It gets more shrouded towards the end, and you have to do a bit of work to figure out exactly what's going on here, but I can appreciate it for at least not making the Slenderman hokey, which is important because the game mechanics you're working with make him really hokey. After this great introduction gets your hopes up with some non-linear, curiosity-driven exploration, you're locked in a plot of woods where you have to play out last year's Slender game all over again. I didn't like that game, and I'm not just gonna chalk it up to personal preferences and call it a day. I have some very specific and substantial reasons why, and most of them are flaws that both games suffer from. I suppose the most efficient way to say it is that it's just too obvious that you're just playing a game with the Slenderman. The rules are almost identical as those from last time. You know how this is gonna go down. There are now just 4 more levels of those same core mechanics. To be fair, the last 2 levels get a bit more creative with the old get the 8 pages objective, but the first 2 are some of the most frustrating trial and error chases that you might have played in a long time. It's predictable, and it's frustrating because you can't play it right unless you know the map, and you're gonna have to die and go through this lengthy and exhausting procedure over and over again before you can finally move on. The actual rules of this game are too simple to maintain a sense of horror, and they're also what make it so frustrating to play. For the 2 viewers who haven't played Slender before, you basically run around a huge disorienting landscape without a map while trying to find a set number of collectibles. The Slenderman's out to get you, and he strategically teleports outside of your peripheral vision and tries to kill you by making you look at him too long, with your regenerating health depleting faster the closer he is to you. A huge amount of very cheap jump scares are baked right into those mechanics, with loud musical stingers adding insult to injury. After enough play, you know where and when to expect him, and the only scary thing about it devolves down into these loud audio-visual shocks. The mechanics of this game are so shallow and simple that you could actually play it in the woods with your own friends. In fact, I encourage you to. Seriously, try to adapt this set of rules to a real-life game of Slender and you'll notice just how shallow it is. Just take some sticky notes and put them on trees and try not to make eye contact with... Oh, yeah, Mr. Peterson, I was just... So some really exploitable strategies then arise based on this very simple and loose rule set. You can take little peeks at the Slenderman to stun him in place. You can actually backpedal away and sidestep around scenery to get him stuck on things. Since he doesn't actually start chasing you until your first page grab, you should always make sure to hit the tightest corners first. Sweeping through the rest of the landmarks in a circular manner minimizes your need to make sharp turns and therefore your risk of losing. I was quite pleased to see that later on a new monster is introduced whose abilities cleverly complement those of the Slenderman's, but it unfortunately doesn't make the rules of this whole game any less shallow. It also doesn't stop the Slenderman from doing this really cheap move where he just teleports a foot away from your ass, and it feels kinda like he's cheating.
But George, of course he's gonna cheat. He's a supernatural teleporting demon thing.
But the problem isn't this character or the fact that he's cheating, the problem is that it feels like he's cheating. In fact, all this talk about moves, strategies, and cheating really evokes why I'm so not cool with this game. It's just too gamey. The logistics and mechanics of Slenderman's actions are too transparent. They're too obvious, and good horror is all about being mysterious. By this measure, Slender is capable of being a good game, but not a good horror game. Horror is mystifying and unexplainable. It's that unknowable black ambiguity that precedes and proceeds life. It's the fear of the unknown, and if you can truly understand the behaviors of this thing that's supposed to be horrifying you, then the effect is ruined. Horror is that basic primal urge for safety that you can often get in otherwise safe areas. Just wander through the woods at night or rummage through an old basement and you might feel horror trembling in the baser layers of your subconscious. Horror is not knowing what's banging on the other side of the lab door in Stalker. Horror is not knowing why there's a baby crying in the apartments in Silent Hill. Horror is not knowing what the hell the water monster in Amnesia is even supposed to be. It's often evoked in video games by set pieces and mechanics that emphasize uncertainty, curiosity, fear, and then shock. In Slender, the Slenderman is the star of the show. You know what you're in for. He's the primary motivator of all the action in the game. So there isn't much uncertainty and curiosity there. You're certain to get grabbed by the Slenderman, and your curiosity to find out how he'll do it is satisfied quite easily. Horror games also engage us in a cycle of player-system interactions that Slender seems a good deal light on. There's certainly not a lot of potential new game states you find yourself in with this one monster and his limited abilities. It's certainly not much of a dexterity challenge, and there aren't that many new variables and outcomes to learn after the first few retries. So, accurately predicting and countering your opponent's moves isn't exactly a horrifying experience. After so many deaths, retries, freezes, and glitches, the Slenderman isn't that menacing, and neither is his game. It's still scary, of course. Please, don't forget that receiving a jump scare is very much part of the process of playing. But this monster can only jump out of the bushes so many times before you notice the zipper running up his costume. After all, his model does look pretty silly. Slender the Arrival is 2 hours long, and I really can't recommend it. I've never been a big fan of Slender, but the aesthetic improvements in story at least make it a more complete product than the freeware game, but both of them just kind of make me want to punch myself. So you play the Slender in your room with your friends, I encourage you to. You just stick a bunch of post-it notes on trees and